topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. So it's Tuesday and a fun day to be with you. So recently, it was very interesting. I was talking to one of my clients, and she was very, very upset at her boss. And so as we were kind of going through our coaching session, and I invited her to think of her boss as a 5-year-old child, because she was not in a position to leave just immediately. And I shared with her that, think about it. Think of your boss as a 5-year-old. And when you see him as a 5-year-old, and when, let's say, he's throwing tantrums, then how do you feel about that? And she said that surprisingly, I can be kind. And so here's the thing. Kindness is not just something that you do it in action. It's also how you see other people and how you think about them. So not knowing what may be going on in their lives, because think about it, when you are giving away the space in your head, you are actually giving away that prime real estate, which is so precious. So it's not about going and allowing people to be mean to you. It's just about how you are reacting to it. So this way you can be kind to yourself, you can be kind to the others. And if you're ready to step up your game, do get our books. And here's what I can share with you, that it's 3 ways. Not only you step up your game, not only you help us spread the message, but we also help Kiva entrepreneurs by donating partial proceeds from our book sales. So let's bring in on our guest. Welcome, Craig.
Well, thank you, Diva. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Craig, share with us, if you recall, a moment or a person who left a positive mark on you in your childhood or youth.
Well, in my youth, it was my, probably my uncle, Ted. He was, my father passed away when I was quite young, and so Ted kind of became my mentor in life. And he was just always doing projects. He was very optimistic. He emphasized both hands-on ability to do things, but also mental abilities to do things. And, he really was a very important influence in my life.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's so important to have those mentors in life, because usually for kids, they emulate adults. And tell me, did you have any specific interest in your youth?
So I liked basketball quite a bit. I played all through high school, and I had some scholarships to Division III, basketball. So, colleges and so forth. I ended up going to Georgetown, and unfortunately, when I got there, they had upgraded the program to Division I with Patrick Ewing and really fabulous players. So I never actually got to play in college, but I've always loved sports. I've always liked writing. That's something I've always done. One thing that Uncle Ted did is he discouraged me from going into journalism. He said, "Oh, that's not a good field." And so I kind of listened to him, and I came back to it after working in the software industry for quite a bit of time. I found I was, I wasn't really that happy, being kind of the entrepreneur and the business guy. So I became what's called an industry analyst, which is sort of a journalist, but it's a journalist that only covers the technology industry. And I've been doing that for 18 years. And really, the second part of my career has been the happiest, because I finally found, the area that, really, gave me passion in my work life.
Yeah. So tell us what led you to the software.
Well, I was originally an economist, and I was working on government contracts in Washington, D.C., where I stayed after college and graduate school. And I just was working for a big company, and all of a sudden there were no economic projects. And so they put me on a technology project to try to forecast the next generation of data communications. And I was looking at it, and it's kind of an interesting story. I was like very junior. I knew nothing about technology, but I was with in an old key punch room with all these sort of revolving door consultants that had filtered in from their federal work, and no one knew what to do. And I started just writing, and all of a sudden I was kind of leading the project. And as I was looking at the data communications world, and that was early. We're talking, ancient history now. It just struck me that, boy, there's something here. This might be a good place to learn about. And then I just became more and more technical as I progressed. Yeah.
Absolutely. So did you just kind of stay in the federal area, or did you also work in the private industry?
No, I grew weary of the federal contracting area, because I just felt you were never really making any really strong progress. So as many things happened, I met a girl in a bar. And we went. I went up to Boston, where I live now, and
Nice.
started working in private sector at technology companies, which I did for a number of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, about federal contract, that it didn't go anywhere. So what would you say was the primary difference between the two? Because, a lot of people our listeners are thinking, what area to go for, like especially the youngsters, they're deciding and they may have different options. So
Yeah.
if somebody were to choose, what would you say are the pros and cons of both industry?
Well, so you see what's happening right now, right?
Right.
So when I was working for this company called MITRE Corporation, which is a nonprofit think tank, and it did. But basically, it kind of tried to keep the contractors honest in sort of protecting the federal government in a lot of ways. But it was a fascinating place. But I wanted to work on public policy. And you had a shift in administrations with Reagan coming in. All of a sudden, it was all defense. So you have these shifts that go with the political winds that adds a variability to your job prospects. And it's no more dramatically evident than what's been happening in the last few weeks, right?
Right.
With the organization coming in, and a new leadership coming in and saying, what, we don't need all these federal jobs. And there's just a lot of great work that's been done for years by a lot of people. So we'll see how that shakes out. So that's kind of the downside. On the private sector side, it's not a picnic there either, because you have much less loyalty from companies to employees. And I write about that in my book, Random Acts, that you no longer can count on, and there's so many mergers and acquisitions. There's so much globalization still. You have technology and automation coming in, which is a big piece of what I write about, that are going to affect and shift jobs around pretty dramatically. So there's really no perfect place, but I would say that the private sector does give you ultimately more flexibility in terms of job repositioning than the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely that makes sense. So as you continued in your career, you mentioned that, you became a forecaster, you became a technical person, analyzing trends and predicting the winds of tomorrow.
Yeah.
So if you can give are so many times what happens is that people think like, oh, open AI is here, like LLMs, which is the large
Large
language?
language models, yes, and
Yeah,
now they're
large
talking about
learning
small
language
language
models.
models.
Yeah, learning language
Yeah.
models are here. And then there's, all the processing and all of that. And yet, if we kind of take a look at it, that automation and AI has been part of our lives for a long time. So if you can just kind of share with us the transition, that'll be great for those who don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we're now calling it narrow AI, which is what you're referring to. We've had machine learning that's been doing predictive analytics for a long time. 20 years probably in various applications. But this generative AI, large language models, is very much more powerful. So, basically by training these models on the entire internet and all that activity, you're able to get very, very close to what I call in the book human capable automation, or HCA. So you're starting to see a AI able to make the same kind of connections that a human makes. Think of it this way. You probably don't read your insurance policies very much. I certainly don't. Usually there's like 2 pages of things they cover and 100 pages of things they don't, right? Written by lawyers for other lawyers to read. So these models can actually allow you to have a conversation with a set of data like that. So you can actually have an AI interface to that and ask, so, how long have I been covered? How much am I paying for this policy? What will my heirs actually get, if it's life insurance? So there's this whole new power that comes from this ability to make connections in a way that humans do. And we're at the cusp of that now, and the early part of that. And these models are getting better and stronger and more capable all the time. So at some point, you're going to have what was called AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is, that's probably, some people say at Forrester. By the way, I work at Forrester Research, which is a big research company. We're predicting that's going to, 2-3 years away, we'll have AGI in the workplace. So this is fundamentally different from that narrow AI that we've been using for quite a bit of time.
Right. And as we are talking about AGI, I know I'm jumping into something more complex, and we will kind of come back to the original one. But now there are so many talks about having the retrieval augmented generation, and Intel is already pretty big into implementing, and a lot of other companies are. So can you tell for our listeners, just the basic difference in machine learning, data sciences, AGI, and the retrieval augmented generation from their perspective as to how is this going to impact them?
Yeah, and that's exactly what this book is attempting to do.
Right.
That's automation. So I explain the relevant technology, but I do it in the context of 4 different distinct worker categories. So what's relevant for your audience is not in general what the technology does, but how it would affect the job role that they're in. So if they're a human touch worker, which might be, helping in a healthcare environment or even working in a warehouse, it's a very different set of technology that's real robotics that's going to affect those jobs. And I think very positively. You're going to have, Android robotics. You're going to have janitorial robotics. You're going to have a lot of physical automation that's going to make their jobs a lot safer and a lot less dirty and a lot better. And there's enough, a need for human agility that you'll see those jobs actually get paid better and be safer. So that's very, very positive. If you're in the middle, there you have more problems, because the type of lower level cognitive work that's done by middle jobs is perfect for software robots. And one of the my book before this was called Invisible Robots in the Quiet of the Night. And I was just writing about these RPA bots that were operating in the cloud that were able to come in and take over a desktop, and do what Harry was doing for 8 minutes, and if you had 100 Harrys doing the same 8-minute task, maybe 1,000 times a month, you could build a bot that would actually, take those hours out. And now these invisible robots, when you add Gen AI to them, are able to even do more. So the middle is going to get, hollowed out much more. And of course, it's suffered from globalization over time. And it's already suffered from automation. So the path for the middle is different. And that's why I separated into these 4 categories. The path for the middle is to become more of an AI operator. And how do you use AI? Actually start doing jobs for those that have higher levels of credentials, more professional credentials, because AI really augments what you can do, and allow you to be the paralegal can now do much more of what a lawyer does. We've already seen that with CNAs and nurse practitioners that will use automation to make more planning and basically be more capable. So they'll get more and more value going. So there's a positive path for the middle as well, but it's the numbers don't work out as well as they do for the human touch workers. And of course, the digital elite, which are the top category, that's probably everybody on your call here. Maybe, actually, you have a very good diverse demographic for your shows, which is I applaud. The digital elite are going to suffer a lot from Gen AI doing more of those human connections. That's part of their job. So data science, you mentioned, that applies to all of this. It's all about the data that you expose to the models. And you mentioned RAG. RAG is the sort of retrieval method to expose the right data. So think of it this way: you've got this, this amazing foundational model that's trained on the entire internet, right? But to make it work for companies, it's got to go and get all the enterprise data that the company has that's within their firewall or on their private cloud. And that's what RAG is doing. RAG is going in and saying, I'm going to retrieve this PDFs that's in this repository that are your standard operating procedures. Yeah. And I'm going to retrieve that and augment it somehow, and a lot of fancy terms like vector databases and so forth. But basically, I'm going to prepare it for the model. So now it knows your specific enterprise context, and it can create the work patterns that are needed to get something done. And that's where the genius of all this is that, all the automation we have today, some big integrator or software developer had to write very specific, prescriptive step-by-step automation to get something done. And now you just feed this information into a model, and the model figures out the steps that are needed. So it's going to be very disruptive to the whole software industry, because a lot of that business logic that's in those, rule-based systems will be displaced by these what are called AI agents or AI models that are going to take that away. Is that too much detail for your audience?
Oh, no. It's like I have been playing in this area for quite some time. So it's important for people to understand that we have had these systems, and how, as you mentioned, that it is getting ahead of it. It is about developing those metacognitive skills to training AI, not to think for you, but to think with you. So this way, what happened, because it cannot read your mind. And AI is as good as the context and the role and the input that you're providing. So
Exactly.
there is hope. And the key is dispersing the fear that people are feeling. So if people are, there are a lot of professionals, like even software engineers, who say there is a no code, especially Claude, Anthropic. It is really good for code generation. And you can kind of drop it in there and it will generate the whole code for you. So what would be your message to them, especially with the mindset? Because what happens is human beings get in their own way.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because personally, I think that it used to be, 5, 7, 8 years ago, the advice to, people coming out of high school or even college was learn to code. And now clearly that's not the right path. But I think that the idea that, or what's not as well understood, I think, is that the actual coding part of a software development is only about 30% of it. So most of the time that a software developer spends is trying to understand what the heck the business wants or the requirements, understanding the testing patterns, trying to break down a process, decompose it and figure out what should be automated. Those are all things that are done in that, what we call the SDLC, the software development lifecycle. So you are going to have a strong augmentation for that 30%, but it's not going to completely disrupt or eliminate many of those jobs. My advice to the, we use this term human in the loop, quite a bit. The developer will have a model in the loop to help them. And yeah, they'll spend a lot less time figuring out, what little specific thing did I do to make a problem. They'll be able to have, a wireframe of the software, built by the model, and then they'll take it from there. So it's going to reduce, a lot of their hours, but I think what they have to do is become stronger on the process understanding side, on that decomposition side, on how to curate the data properly. What data is important? To your point, it's about the data on the way in. There's so much automation that's being planned, and that's really why I wrote the book. I mean, I'm in the tech industry every
definitely.
day. I'm talking to business leaders that are just frantic to apply AI to everything. I'm talking to the tech vendors, who just can't wait, there are 400 startups in building AI agents, which are essentially, digital workers, 400.
Actually, you're absolutely right. And if anybody has had a chance to play with ChatGPT Pro, it will go and they've just recently released the operators, and they will go inside your computer. They'll take over your computer, book appointments for you, book your travels for you. So it's already here. And the key is I want to come back to what you said, is knowing the process. And the key to know is that human intervention is going to be there. It's going to be doing your grunt work. So it's the whole idea is, even for the companies, is to take care of that repetitive work, that grunt and the grind for the people, and allowing them to think, opening up the room for more curiosity and critical thinking. And when that happens, when we create that intersection where humans are doing the thinking, yes, I know ChatGPT Pro and now DeepSeek can connect the dots and all that, and yet that human experience that you're bringing is going to be more and more valuable based on what you're saying. So am I hearing it right?
Yeah, no, you're hearing it right. I'd probably make a few edits to that, but I think it's right. I think there's going to be much greater premium on the human element or the accent. I think for a lot of companies, I like to say the margin is in the memories. If you can create a human experience as part of your customer experience, that's going to be more memorable. And right now I have a chapter on called self-service hell, because we've really gone almost too far in forcing people to become unpaid employees on the first day of the job and doing self-service for various retail operations and others. We're about reaching that tipping point where click rage and where people are just getting really frustrated. Spain has now fines companies if they don't get a human on the phone for a certain period of time. So I think there's going to be smart companies will use humans in more innovative ways. The one thing I would edit to what you said, though, is one of the terms that has seeped into the tech industry and in general faster than any word I've ever seen is agentic AI. And this is basically, the idea that you have the model in full control of the process and implementing and making various agents that are built to do various things coordinate in kind of an any flow kind of way. And right now there's no truly agentic applications that we can find. I have a report coming out called, agentic agents are a rare sighting, but we're close to that. The frameworks, some of them that you've mentioned that are coming into play, the agentic AI frameworks are going to allow us to build very, very complex systems that are self-optimizing, adapting, that are in complete control of a process. And for the business to make that investment, they're going to need to replace a human. Yeah. In other words, a lot of these co-pilots that you hear about, Agent Force was on, from Salesforce, was a Super Bowl commercial, right?
Right.
They're not making any money for any of those companies. They're not being monetized because putting a model in front of you, Diva, and making you a little smarter is, you're probably not going to pay $300 a month for that, right? But
No,
when you add, when you add a strong action component to it, where you have this sort of multi-flow or any flow coordination of agents, you're starting to, companies will pay $3,000 a month if they can replace Harry, and that's what they're doing. So while a lot of the narrative in the tech industry, I talk to tech vendors all the time. They say, "Oh, well, there's going to be more interesting things for people to do. They're going to be more strategic and more planning." The reality is the numbers just don't work. There just are not enough of those kind of jobs to really offset the numbers that will be taken away by AI doing a lot of these things.
So we have touched upon a lot of different points. And so what would be the best path forward for our audience?
Well, I think if your son or daughter is in the basement playing video games for 6 months or so, I think you go out and buy my book, Random Acts of Automation. Say, go get a job. I really do think that there has to be a better understanding of the automation trends that are occurring and how they affect the job that you're in. I interviewed 100, and I probably have written up 40 different workers, and I listened to their stories. I have Enzo, the machinist, who was a top performer for 20 years, and they upgraded his machine, so that now, instead of doing the machine operation, which he was a top performer, he had to enter G codes into the machine, and basically the setup had gotten much more complicated. And he went to his boss and said, I just can't do this anymore. Can I just run the machine and somebody else can? And some young guy tried to help him and train him. You talk to I talked to this woman named Julie in a big call center, and she's having to train her software robots really to do all of her updates and all her work. You can kind of see, you don't have to be a genius to see where this is going. So for each of those kind of roles, there are steps you can take and that are very positive. And a lot of it is kind of the things you started to talk about in the beginning of the show. It's about constructive ambition and grit. There are a lot of specifics. Some of the things that you look at when you look at upgrading your skills are just overwhelming. But take a incremental approach. Set your goals modestly so you can have strong achievement. An area that I'm fascinated with is critical thinking, which is, the reason we're all here today is because there was a Russian who, had gotten the nuclear codes that the U.S. was attacking with with 5 nuclear missiles. And he didn't pull the trigger because he noticed that there were some anomalies. He applied critical thinking before he basically countered there's probably a very little known guy, that saved us. And he is all critical thinking. So one of the things about critical thinking is that it's not just for the digital elite, which is a lot how it started. It's not just for, people with more advanced credentials. It can be applied to anyone working in a warehouse or so forth. And now there's a lot of information to make it more adaptable to and more understandable and less academic in its approach. I really like that aspect of it. I think this idea of being an AI operator For those that are working in the human touch area, a lot of kids today have great device skills. They want to work on their phones. They live on their phones, and there are a lot of jobs that want those skills. So why work in McDonald's? When you can get a job that can leverage skills that you have a much better job. The human touch workers, there are certain industries that are applying automation in ways that benefit them, such as security with the Android, robotic officers. That's a great area to go into. It's much better than food service. So that's the kind of advice that I give. You have to look at the way companies are trending and investing in automation and how that can make your job either better or worse. And there's some cases it can make your job a lot better. I love the path that the middle has by leveraging AI to do the work of more educated and credentialed, professional workers. You're definitely going to see that erosion. So the digital elite are going to see erosion from the bottom, and they're going to see erosion directly, by Gen AI and AI doing more of what they do. And then there's the work-life pioneers, which is the fourth category of worker. I think there's it's been trending for a while, right? If you look at the number of so-called gig workers or contract workers, it's 30%. It's been growing, it's been ticking up, and it really accelerated after the pandemic. And the pandemic, like the sequoia trees that have the cones that only surface after a big devastating fire, the pandemic really opened the door. Opened the door to a lot of people, just questioning what they're doing in their lives. And I have some really good stories of, like a David White who, adopted a child and it changed his life. And he became a foster care advocate, a think tank for foster care. And he noticed that all the foster care kids, they moved 3 or 4 times in their early years, and they always put their belongings in a garbage bag. So his first act was to get all the luggage companies to donate luggage to the foster care community. And there's a lot of companies that are just focusing on certification and education that is very practical. The government's not going to solve the skills problem. The skills problem is going to be solved more by the private sector. And even a Walmart, who is beat up a lot for all kinds of things, they have like 100 Walmart universities, which are interestingly in old warehouses that, are because of analytics and supply chain are now vacant. So they set them up as universities. And I interviewed one woman, and she'd never graduated from anything in her life. And so they have a formal graduation ceremony with blue gowns and caps. And she said, for my kids to see me graduating, it was just it was a heart-wrenching, moment. So there are companies that are, providing certifications and skills advancements that I think everyone could take advantage of.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic. And it's just stepping into it, leaning into it, because this can have an impact on mental health. And then, of course, getting your book. So tell us a little bit about your book and where can people find you and find your book?
Well, I'd love to. Thank you so much. Again, thanks for having me on. Well, I'm glad you mentioned mental health. I have the 2 main things about the book are specific skills to help workers in these 4 categories, starting with the trends affecting them from automation and then what they can do about it. So it's not written for academics. It's not written for the business to make more money with technology. It's written for workers. So that's the first main thing. The middle section, I have a whole section with 3 chapters on mental health. And I'm not in any way trained in that regard. I speak only to the mental health effects of automation. Yeah. And I have a chapter called Invasion in surveys that we did. And I have a lot of data from Forrester research here to support some of the ideas. I'm not overwhelming the reader with a lot of data, but when you look at the random acts of automation, which is, there's actually a public site that people can, if they have a bad experience with automation, they can throw it into this site and then they track them. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands. So I took the database and sorted it, and it turned out that of the 3 trust issues, invasion issues and what I call isolation issues. That invasion was number one by about 40% of all negative reported effects due to automation were invasive monitoring, invasive, use of biometrics. I have stories. There's the company that owns Madison Square Garden. They have a biometric for going into their events, and they basically, if you were involved in any lawsuit against this entity, which gets sued all the time, you were blocked. So there was some woman with her daughter going to see the Rockettes one December, and she never even heard of the company, but worked for a law firm that actually had some litigation with them, and she was denied access. I mean, this is, I talked to a McDonald's employee that they do, analytics on every single store at McDonald's, real time. And if they're forecasting that there'll be a slowness between, say, 10 and 12 o'clock at a particular store, they'll send a text to an employee who might be on a bus to come to work and tell them not to come, not to show up. Now, New York just passed a law to prevent that.
Yeah.
But all of these, this invasive, all of this automation. There's a woman in Australia that one of the biggest insurance company in Australia, they put listening software on her desktop, and it tracked every mouse movement, every the time spent, everything, and that is something that's outlawed in Germany, but that's something that's creeping in. It's a whole area called task mining, but they fired her, and they had this report of how many days she left a little bit early, how many times she did this, how many times she did that, which she refuted. She said that's not accurate. But she had no knowledge that they were doing this kind of monitoring, on her. So anyway, I could go on and on.
Right.
But this is why I wanted to. This type of monitoring really affects the mental stability and health of employees. And of course, trust issues are just huge now. You can't trust almost anything you see on the internet, except for this program, right? So
here you're bringing live people, so
right, a lot of people. So basically, and the isolation aspect. I think one of the aspects of a lot of their remote work is that the digital lead are not interacting with middle workers or human touch workers as much. We tend to be, so digitally focused, because now we're not just on our phones at work. I mean, we're staring at screens. A lot of us are staring at screens during work all the time. So there's a lot of the whole aspect of random acts is that we have this juggernaut tech industry that's bursting with enthusiasm, innovation, and money to build the next thing, but they don't know what this next thing will do. It's unpredictable because inherently all of this is based on probability. It's not different than going to Las Vegas and playing the crap tables. You have statistics that are taking a best guess based on all kinds of factors. There's potential error and unpredictable aspects, riddled through all of this that are going on at a greater rate than ever. So that's the whole purpose of the book, Random Acts, which is available on Amazon. And it's the publisher is called Post Hill, which is a great publisher out of Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm happy to finally get it done.
Well, congratulations. And sounds like it's going to help a lot of people. So I'm sure that, our audience is going to definitely go and get a copy of it. And if they want to connect with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, I'm all over LinkedIn,
Okay.
but I'll throw out my email if you want to contact me. I'm just C Le Clair, that's LECLAIR at Forrester.com.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Craig, and sharing your insights and giving us different perspectives that how we can go forward, how we can approach it, and how we can kind of continue working with it and growing with it. So thank you for joining us. And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
absolutely. Thank you, dear audience, for joining us, because without you, the show would not be possible. You are the life and soul of our show. Reach out to us. Let us know how we can support you. and help you live the life you deserve and achieve your goals. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.